well. Mine is to just do a word of welcome. The Presidential Climate Commission, even if we don't have a president now, we still have the Presidential Climate Commission. But I mean, because you know what's happening in the country, I'm sure we'll have a president tomorrow or on Saturday or next week. But he'll find the commission because the commission was not made on the 29th of May. And it was made before and it will exist after. And as the commission were basically saying, whatever is happening in the country, the commission has been created by law because a lot of youth, workers, communities said that we needed a structure that is not only government, where you can all go and raise our just transition, our climate action issues. So for us as the commission, this dialogue represents the third dialogue we're participating in, represents a step in the right direction. We've always said that the first step to agreeing is to engage and to talk to each other. And that's what we're calling it a dialogue. We're not calling it a presentation or not calling it anything. It's a dialogue because we want to talk to each other in a civilized way, in a respectful way. So for the commission, the youth work particularly is very interesting for us. And I know I might not be young, and I like telling people that I literally grew up in the environmental sector. My first job was in the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism then, and I worked in Mpumalanga. But I've also been a youth leader and a student leader. So the demands that you make are the same demands you've made, you know, and I'm happy that they're being carried over. But I'm also sad that these are the same demands some of us made 30 years ago, which means old people don't listen. But I promise, I used to be young, I'm old now, so I'll listen because it's like I'll be hearing my voice from the past because these are the same demands I've been making. So on the commission, we'd like to welcome you to this intergenerational dialogue. It's going to be short presentations, but the intention is for us to talk to each other and probably say what next for this generation so that when it becomes the next generation into the future, it actually harvest the fruits of the discussions that we're having today. So those words of welcome, I would like to say thank you for joining us. And I can see that it's also tilted from a gender balance. It also means that these men don't care about the environment. So Bafwit, Ms. Pumalana, I want, and I know the gender balance with population is not 50-50, you know, but at least because we're already doing 50-50 in other areas. Also, let's also do 50-50 in attendance of events and engagement so that Labo Sisi, Labo Mama, they must not come and drive us into a way with this so that we don't move from climate inequity to gender inequity. So that when we try to arrive at equity, we don't reverse the game. So equity is not about replacing good with bad. It's about making sure that the good out of the inequality continues and the bad is thrown away. So I'm trying to call on young men, young boys to continue to fight the struggle. And we know that globally the struggle is led by women, but the decisions are made by men. The same way, the struggle is led by youth, but the decisions are made by old people. So with those words of welcome, I'm saying, let us change that and let us make sure that this generation becomes the generation that change all those issues. I could speak for long, but Mudiek is not going to allow that. But I also, because I don't want to speak the length of my age. So I'll stop at 60 seconds because I'm 59 years old. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome message, Blessing. That is much appreciated. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, who is Yasira Madi, a policy and food systems researcher from the Institute of Economic Justice. She'll be giving us a brief address on strengthening intergenerational dialogue in the context of the global climate crisis and youth engagement. Yasira, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, and I'm excited to be here at this intergenerational dialogue. My name is Yasira Madi, and I represent the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project, which is a collaborative initiative between WWF South Africa, the South African Climate Action Network, and the Institute for Economic Justice, co-funded by the European Union and the Swedish Development Agency. Just to give you a brief overview of what the CAAP project is about, it's a 4-year project that started in 2021 and will go up until 2025. And it aims to empower youth and civil society organizations to actively engage in climate policy. So our goal is to mainstream crucial cross-cutting issues in national climate policy, such as human rights, gender equity, gender equality rather, climate equity, and economic justice. And a key and very successful aspect of the CAAP project has been the Youth Climate Champions, or the YCC program, which is aimed at creating a network of active young people. And the context for the creation of the YCC is that in South Africa, youth have historically been on the fringes of policy processes. The engagement has been fragmented with significant barriers, including a lack of access to policy processes, resources, knowledge, and opportunities. But despite these challenges, it is the future of the youth that is most at risk at the impact of climate change. So the objective of the YCC is to empower a cohort of youth climate champions who can engage actively with climate action and policy processes through providing young people with comprehensive training, mentorships, and access to policy participations, and capacitating the next generation of climate activists and policy advocates. And our activities are designed as such. They're designed to motivate sustained involvement, and are co-designed with young people to ensure their needs and perspectives are central. And one of these activities has been this intergenerational dialogue. As mentioned, this will be our third year hosting this dialogue in Youth Month. And these dialogues are important for many reasons. Firstly, the climate crisis is an issue that transcends generations. So effective climate action requires the combined efforts of all age groups. These dialogues enable knowledge transfer, so older generations bring experience and historical context, while the younger generation brings innovation, energy, and fresh perspectives. They foster shared responsibility, so climate change impacts everyone, and therefore everyone must be part of the solution. And they enable sustainable solutions. Long-term solutions require the input and commitment of those who will live with the consequences the longest, which is young people. So yeah, that's just a brief introduction of the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project, which I think gives good context, and the YCC and the work that we're doing. So please feel free to join our networks, and I'm sure there'll be announcements at the end of this to say how else you can join the YCC if anyone is interested. But just before we begin, then a call to action from the YCC. So to the youth who are present today, the message is that your voice matters, and that you should engage actively, seek out knowledge, and take part in policy discussions, take part in the discussion today, but also beyond. And to the policymakers and senior advocates, to create more space for youth involvements, listen to their perspectives, and support their initiatives. And I think together we can then build a more inclusive and effective climate movement that bridges any generational divide. So thank you so much. I'll hand back to Mudihe so that we can start with the program.
Thank you for that comprehensive and quite informative overview of the CAAP project, Yasira. I hope that the youth in the room are more interested to know about YCC, but we'll get into that later. Right now, we will be having a keynote address from our Youth Commissioner on the PCC, Ms. Ayaka Melitafa.
I would like to start off by saying good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a special good afternoon to the most important people in the room, the youth. My name is Ayaka Melitafa, and I'm the Youth Commissioner, one of the Youth Commissioners on the Presidential Climate Commission. And I remember the first time I spoke to our former president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, and it was during the Youth Sona a couple of years back, where he gave young people the opportunity to speak to him about what issues are bothering us as youth the most and what we'd like him to do about it. So as my fellow young people were speaking about poverty and unemployment and inequality, I saw that there was a gap, that not many young people were voicing climate change, even though we had been affected by the drought in Cape Town, and we already saw signs that climate change is becoming a very serious issue. So at the end of the discussion with the president, there was a time to ask questions and get answers. And I was very quiet and I was just listening, but on the last round of questions, I stood up, I waved my hands like I was crazy just so I could get noticed and I could ask him a question. And my question to him was, why are we not doing anything about climate change? We are the 14th biggest emitter of climate emissions in the whole world, but yet we're not doing anything adequate when it comes to climate change. We see how it's affected us, and we have this unique opportunity in South Africa to lead the charge into renewable energy because of where we are positioned. After I just went on at him, asking him all of these different types of questions, he decided to sit back down, start taking notes, and actually try to listen to what I was saying. And his response to my question was, I hear you. And we've been speaking with the government. He had just come back from an international trip where he vouched to start a commission, like the Presidential Climate Commission, where it could be a commission that transitions South Africa from a high carbon intensive economy to a low carbon intensive economy. And as young people in the room, we were all very, let's not make sure here, because our president and just government officials in general are not known for being forthright with their words. And a couple of months went by, but here to my surprise, he actually stood on his word. He started the Presidential Climate Commission, and he invited me to be a youth commissioner on that commission. And so far, the commission has done remarkable work when it comes to the climate space. We have been active in many climate decisions and forums internationally. Our secretariat has been very strong in advocating for climate. And most importantly, young people have been involved in decision-making from the beginning. I remember us going to Emalahleni, just going all around South Africa to actually see if people have an appetite for climate change and what they want to know or what they expect from us as the commission. So, and we have published a lot of documents as the Climate Commission, like the Just Transition Framework, and our most recent publication is the State of Climate Action Report that is going to be publicly launched on the 17th of July. And this report is basically PCC's first assessment of climate action in SA, and it focuses on where progress is being made when it comes to climate action, where there are critical gaps in climate action in South Africa, and the necessary shifts or changes that will be required to achieve a low carbon economy. The PCC is tasked with making recommendations on how we can bridge these gaps, and I firmly believe that South African youth have a very unique opportunity to be the drivers in bridging those gaps. As young people, before we even knew what climate change was, the word, we felt it. We felt it on our bodies, we felt it in our families, and we felt it in our communities, because we did not just hear the word, we were experiencing it. I went through a drought, that's why I became an activist. Young people in KZN got severely affected by the floods that are happening, and they continue to happen. But do we actually know what is causing these droughts? Do we even know that it's climate change behind all of this chaos and that we have a role to play? Yeah. And one thing that always triggered me as a young person is that all of this is happening around our country, but we are not getting taught about it in schools. We are not seeing enough of it in news. And it's just not a popular topic in society. And we have actually practical examples of this in this report, because there's a chapter that is actually titled Public Perceptions and Attitudes on Climate Change and a Just Transition. And in this chapter, a survey was conducted with about 3,000 people all over SA, random people all over SA, and they were asked many different questions when it comes to climate change, the appetite, just transition, electricity, and less than a third of South Africans report knowing a lot about the country moving away from coal, a third of South Africans report knowing little about the country moving away from coal to renewable energy, and only 9% heard or know about the term just transition. To me, this was very, very alarming. It was very scary, and it really showed that we have an opportunity or a duty to make sure that we go back to the basics, which is awareness. And I believe just by us as South Africans building awareness on climate change in schools and society, our young people will become more active in climate action. We will feel empowered to speak up and participate in climate policy dialogues. We will create our own innovative solutions and become climate leaders in our own communities. And I stand before you right now as an example on how effective it can be for a young person to get resources and knowledge on what is affecting their lives on a daily basis. And when it comes to, and as when I talk about examples, when it comes to examples, I'm only one person in this whole thing. Just me looking around this room, I firmly believe that there's young, active, and powerful climate advocates for the environment that are doing amazing things out there just because a person took the day of time to speak to them and educate them on climate change and gave them the empowerment to know that they can go out there and create a change and that they don't have to wait for the government or wait for an adult to give you the go-ahead to actually make sustainable change. In this State of Climate Action report, it identifies the clear barriers to progress. And despite our strong commitment, South Africa's progress to climate change is always hindered by our inconsistent policies. You know, we always have these great policies, it's always been noted, but when it comes to action, there's a very big gap in youth governance structures and insufficient finance for this youth climate action work. Youth can overcome these barriers, firstly, through advocating for active participation in government, and this can be achieved through youth councils, advisory bodies, and other platforms that give young people a voice in policy development and implementation. And by being involved, young people can help ensure that these policies are inclusive and effectively address the needs of all citizens in South Africa. The Presidential Climate Commission's South African State of Action Climate Report underscores the importance of monitoring and progress and holding stakeholders accountable. So it's something that needs to be more reiterated in this document, and how young people have an opportunity to play a crucial role in the area of engaging and analyzing different opportunities when it comes to climate change. This grassroots involvement from young people can provide valuable insights and support evidence-based decisions that young people can also advocate for greater transparency in policies and action. By monitoring the government, leaders and hold them accountable and push for the implementation of promised measures, a powerful tool that young people can use and that we know of is social media. And we see how young people have been using this tool. And in order for us to even be able to do these things that I've outlined right now, it all goes back to awareness building. And the question that I have for you as a fellow young person is that, are we going to wait for the government to come and give us awareness building? Are we going to wait for other people to hand it out to us? Are we going to be patient and hope that one day people are going to finally look at us and say, these people deserve to know what is happening in their country? In my opinion, as young people all over the world have shown us, we can actually stand up and create change. We can decide to educate each other. We can build awareness within each other. For example, I joined the climate movement through an NGO, and it gave me resources, it capacitated me, and it made me feel empowered enough to go out there and not doubt my skills as a young person that is being affected by climate change. And through organizations like NGOs, we can equip young people to be active participants in the just transition, to challenge the status quo, to actually have our voice in the most critical conversations that have to do with our livelihoods. So as a young person, I highly believe in you. I've seen it in my circle. I've seen it with young people all around me, that it's all about how we believe in ourselves and how we perceive ourselves. Because if we think we are worth investing in, then the world will look at us as such. But if we feel like we are too young to care about these things and we leave it to the adults, as Blessing has said, they will not listen to us. And 30 years later, we'll be sitting here or we'll be affected by another flood and we won't know where to go because we'll feel like the government is not taking care of us. So as young people, I highly believe in us. We are the stewards of change and we are the leaders of today, as we always say as young people. So it's our duty to make sure that our voices are heard in all of these spaces. And we can start doing that by commenting on the State of Climate Action report that is coming up and making sure that whatever is written in that report, that we are, number one, we are good with it, we agree with it, and we are going to make our government know if there's anything that we do not agree with. because that report is so important for the future of young people in the just transition. So thank you very much.
That is the right energy. Thank you so much for that lovely keynote address, Commissioner. I really hope that the youth in the room have been inspired by Ayaka's words. I hope that you are aware that there's in fact action that you can take to make a better future for yourselves. There's such practical steps to take. One is to actively participate in stakeholder engagement, right? So when we complain about government policies and the inconsistencies between what the people want and what the government wants, we actually fail to see that in the middle is stakeholder engagement. So when the State of Climate Action Report is released, please, as young people, it is your duty, if you care about climate change and you are in KZN right now, to comment on that State of Climate Action Report, because nobody knows about the worst effects of climate change more than you in South Africa. We don't need to cite that KZN has seen extreme weather events. There's been a tornado, lives have been lost, livelihoods have not recovered from the previous floods. You know very well what is at risk. Even if you might not fully understand all of the moving parts, you know more than anybody else what is really at risk. And so I hope that you take the words that the commissioner has given us and you're inspired to join an NGO, join a youth climate movement, even come up to us after the session and ask us questions about what can you really do to change it, or what is really going on? What is the just transition? So having said that, we will be having our intergenerational panel. And as Mr. Blessing Manala has mentioned, we have two commissioners with us today. So we have Ms. Ayaka Melitapa and we have Ms. Mbadi Bajuza. We will be having Mr. Kule Duma, Ms. Bertha Letsoko, and Esther Chilala as well. This session will be facilitated. And Udirile Mariri, apologies. I caught that in the last minute, please forgive me. This session will be facilitated by Ms. Ntabiseng Masinga from the PCC Secretariat's Communications team. Over to you, Ntabiseng.
Sanbanan, Ninjan, and a very good day to the colleagues online. My name is Ntabiseng Masinge. I am a Senior Communications and Stakeholder Relations Specialist in the PCC Secretariat. We've just received a very well-rounded, very inspirational and informative keynote address from one of the commissioners in the Presidential Climate Commission, the youngest commissioner, actually. And thank you so much to Mudiesi, my colleague from CAAP, for taking us through the opening speeches for the day. We are going to have a very interactive session now. We're going to be speaking to very knowledgeable young people, 5 young people actually. And some of them are actually have been debating with me today as to whether or not they still qualify as, you know, young people. But youth and all. But nonetheless, they're still young people. And it's very exciting that at the 3rd installment of the Intergenerational Dialogue, we're actually not speaking to, you know, the likes of Blessing. It's actually young people speaking to other young people. And it's quite interesting that most of the young people that we'll be engaging with now are in, you know, very high positions within their organizations. So it's interesting to note, you know, what their experience has been so far, and what we as the younger young people can learn from that, and what actions are going to emerge from that. So I'd like to start by introducing you to our speakers. We have on the panel Commissioner Mbalenhle Baduza. She's the CEO of the Constitution Hill Trust and the Deputy Secretary of the Climate Justice Coalition. You may come on stage. The second panelist that we have in the room with us is Bertha Letsoko. She's an activist. She's from the African Climate Reality Project. Thank you. And then online, we have Esther Chilala. She's from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. She's joining us online. And then we have Udirile Mariri, project coordinator for economic inclusion at the National Business Initiative, the NBI, who's also online. And last but not least, we have Khululekile Khule Duma. He's the director in the project management unit responsible for the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. So thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us. To the colleagues that are joining us online, we will have, after this little discussion, time for some questions and answers from our panelists. So you're welcome to, at the moment, put your questions in the Q&A section, and we will address them, but we will also give you time to speak, whether you're in the room or you're online. So I'd like to actually start with one of our commissioners from the PCC, Mbali Baduza. Ayaka spoke about, this new report that we've put together as the Climate Commission. And I just want to pose to you, just to open up the discussion, what are the key policy issues that have emanated from this State of Climate report? And if maybe you could contextualize and reflect on that, on some of the actions, climate actions that we've taken in the last 30 years of our democracy.
Thanks, Tavi. I'll focus on one challenge that the report puts emphasis on, and it's something that we've mentioned quite a bit this afternoon already, which is the mismatch between commitments and action. So in South Africa, as you know, we have strong public support and policy commitments to climate action and to drive the just transition. It's something that we want as a people. But what our policies say and what we want to achieve on the one hand, and what we actually do about it, the implementation, the practical outcomes, one goes left, one goes right. Typical South African. And we must be honest with ourselves, we are known as a country that has rich policy, but poor implementation. So the report talks about there being 3 drivers to this. There's a reason why this is happening. And the first one is because we have contradictory public policy and positions. So, we have the executive, part of the state, and we have different ministers, different departments, and they all have their own view. One of them, one powerful one, is the future of the energy sector. So the state, particularly the executive, must wrestle with competing priorities, right? So on the one hand, we need energy security. We need to stop load shedding, right? We also need to grow our economy. But what it takes to do that has health implications for people. It also means that we might not meet our climate commitments. So there's a tension that the executive has to grapple with. And so do you. You would have to think about, how do you balance this? And how do we advocate for the right thing? So there is a lack of consensus around when we phase out fossil fuels. Do we start now? Do we start in 2020, in 2030 or 2040? When do we start? And while we delay making that firm decision, that means certain policies won't be implemented to help the just transition. So that's one aspect of it. Another concern is the financial and technical inadequacies in our local government. There are government reports, especially from the Auditor General, that say about 60% of our municipalities are dysfunctional. But how can that be? I mean, municipalities are basically our front line when a disaster happens. So we are already starting from the back foot. And then lastly, and I'll stop here, is the money, how we're going to pay for this transition. And, you know, we just don't have enough money available coming from the private sector, the public sector, internationally, and domestically. While we have raised funds for mitigation, you know, reducing the emissions, what we haven't done enough of is raise funds for adaptation, the resilience aspect, because let's be honest, we are living at a time where the climate crisis is here, but we're not prepared. Every time there's a natural disaster, our infrastructure is affected, for instance, our livelihoods are affected, for instance, and we don't have enough money or haven't mobilized enough money to be resilient. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Paduza. I think it's important that we center the discussion around young people. And in order for us to come out of this dialogue with some tangible solutions that we can go out and implement, we need to, you know, look at the issues that are most important for us. And one of the interventions that the State of Climate Action Report identifies, you know, as a way to actually empower people is through, you know, skills development and entrepreneurship. And I would like to then pose a question to Bertha on the skills deficit, you know, in marginalized communities and how you think we can address this.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you for the question. I think it's very important for us, before we can actually speak about addressing the skills deficit, to consider what the just transition looks like for affected communities. What does the just transition look like for people in Lephalale? What does it look like for people in Soweto? What does it look like for people in Durban? You know, because if we don't have a contextualized framework, we then do not know how we are going to create sustainable skill development programs, right? And so I think it's very important for us to have a framework that speaks to the lived experiences of the communities that we work with, the lived experiences of the youth. And even when we do consult about the just transition, we need to understand how it's going to be economically viable for young people, right? You know, the skills deficit is quite alarming, but the knowledge of the green economy is also very alarming, right? And so how do we dissect that conversation and start from actually capacitating people from the get-go about this just transition? And how do we also inform the JET-IP, the Just Transition Investment Plan, to be able to be a true vehicle for sustainable progress? And then we can actually answer the question about green skills, because we cannot have a blanket approach when it comes to the different skills. We've got different provinces in this country. We've got different socioeconomic issues, different challenges. How do we then make sure that people are not left behind when we discuss green economy and green skills? I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Bertha. One of the other things that Commissioner Paduza spoke about was, you know, the barriers to entry, you know, in climate action. And one of them is the inadequate finance. And I like that you spoke about the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan here, and, you know, having a framework for the just transition. But maybe we can just bring in our colleague from the PMU, Kule, to speak to us a little bit about, you know, this JET-IP. I know a lot of people when Mudiete asked if we know what the just transition is in the room, we didn't get, very clear answers from most people. But I think when we move into a discussion about, just energy transition and investment and things like that, it gets even more confusing. So Kule, can you tell us about the JET IP? What is it? And is there anything in the JET IP that takes into consideration youth, and in particular, this skills deficit that Bertha just spoke about?
No, thanks for that. Much appreciated. And I think also when it's tough when you're sitting online, as my fellow colleague panelists will know, to see who's in the room. But the sense I got was that there was maybe some, not confusion, but maybe a little bit more information that we had to provide on what the just energy transition is. And I'll try to answer the question, but I think what I'll like to do is maybe give a little bit of that context, because I think in some way it starts to answer why the JET IP was necessary. As many people in government, we often start at the beginning, and for us, the beginning is when our economy was developed in many instances, in its current form. Of course, we know the history of South Africa is one that was based on mining, the exploration of minerals, and then, of course, the history of apartheid, which made sure that there was very cheap labor as an input into that. Now, that was an economy, quite frankly, which, dependent on a few very dirty industries, was built around the extraction of coal. And then, of course, there was the human impact that we know throughout the history of our country. And so when we talk about the just energy transition, it's not so much about energy alone, even though energy is the impetus. And in many instances, energy is the impetus of economic development of the economy more broadly, but rather is about how do we transform our economy. One, to respond to the socioeconomic needs that I think a lot of the people in the room are concerned about: employment, making sure that industries are fit for purpose in the future, making sure that you've got the inclusion of youth and etc., but also making sure that there is the justice aspect, right? That these are industries that ensure that there's sustainability in the long term, that ensure that the constitutional imperative and the right for a clean environment is actually then protected in many instances, right? And so this is really a transformative aspect. And so what does it mean, and why do we need to do this? The first instance, as I've articulated, is dealing with, in many instances, the ghosts of the past and the current reconfiguration of our economy. The second one is around the fact that, we have, as has been indicated, we are a country that is very susceptible to climate change impacts. We've just seen floods in the Durban area and the Eastern Cape area in the last couple of months, right? And of course, that is a global phenomenon. But certainly we are the country that has contributed to that because of our dependency on fossil fuels. So it is quite important that we really think about how we transition our own energy landscape as well. And luckily, we're actually a country that has an abundance of renewable energy resources as well. So it is actually for us a competitive advantage to make use of that cheap energy. But also, we are part of a global economy. And if we think about the future, the reality of the situation is that a lot of the world is actually transitioning towards a low carbon economy. A lot of the countries where we ship our cars, we ship our minerals, we ship our goods, have an expectation that when those goods get there, that there isn't a lot of inputs from a carbon process, right? One of the things I think of is something called the carbon adjustment mechanism, the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe, which really taxes you very highly and makes your goods uncompetitive. If, for example, it was found that the creation of those goods had a lot of input in terms of, carbon. And so we've got to make sure that our economy, the future of the economy, the young people that are in the room right now, who are part of my generation, have an economy that is able to carry them. And a big part of that, of course, transitioning. So what the JET IP seeks to really respond to that, it focuses on, one, let's deal with the energy crisis, which a lot of that work is happening through the National Energy Crisis Committee. But how do you create new generation capacity? And we're happy to say that there's about 18 to 22 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity in the pipeline, right? And then the second one is also around how do you look at new industries, for example, new energy vehicles. These are electric vehicles. We've manufactured vehicles in this country for more than 100 years. And so we're actually very primed to actually manufacture vehicles which are electric in nature, and which there's a lot of demand for around the world. And then, of course, there's things that we must look at. Mpumalanga is ground zero, not just in South Africa, but I would argue globally for the just energy transition. You can transition, you can move to renewables, but if you don't think about the coal workers, the people who are dependent on those industries, as to reskilling, as to the alternative jobs that they'll do within the green economy, then you're going to leave people behind. And in that, you leave a lot of young people behind, because one of the things we don't speak about is the amount of young people that are in those jobs specifically, right? And then, of course, there's the aspect of skilling, which we've spoken about, making sure that we are prepared for the future of the economy. And so what the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan, or the investment plan rather, tries to do is to make sure that we can leverage funding from overseas. And first, when we started, we got concessional funding from what we call the International Partner Group for 8.5 billion Rand. Now, that's a mix of grant funding, concessional loans, and so on, but also funding locally. Looking at the big banks, for example, that we have, looking at the host pools of money that sit within CSI funding, corporate social responsibility funding, for example, and pulling that money together to really fund the transition, whether it's in energy, the electricity sector, whether it is funding the work that is happening in trying to create alternative jobs in Mpumalanga province, the work that has to happen in new energy vehicles, and so on. And so, happy that this is, of course, an event that is partly hosted by the PCC, because in many instances we are guided by the various instances of justice, of the principles of justice that the PCC has spoken about. A big part of that is, of course, procedural justice, making sure that as we implement the next steps of the implementation plan as it relates to the just energy transition, we have got the people who are affected by it, including young people, in that process. And so we've tried to make sure that in designing the plan, we leverage the amazing work that has been done by the PCC in terms of engaging young people. And I think that's why very strongly in the work in Mpumalanga, there were two things that came out. One was the need for skilling, the need to work with the TVET system. One of my colleagues, Baba, and working with the NBI, working with business, is really around how do you create that skills ecosystem that develops those future-proof skills to build the new energy vehicles, to work on those renewable energy plants as well, to develop a green manufacturing, even farming that is going to be needed presently, quite frankly, not even in the future. One of the biggest kind of environmental emitters is the agricultural sector. So that work is happening. But the second aspect is the funding aspect as well, which is really important. In many instances, the big companies, they've already got the funding they need to influence or to implement the just energy transition as it relates to their operations. But it's really about how do you get the funding to the people who've been left behind in many instances. And in that instance, we've developed something called the Just Energy Transition Funding Platform, which is really about how you match funding to where the need for funding is. And a big focus of it, of course, is looking at those stakeholders, including, small businesses, including youth-owned businesses, women-owned businesses that want to get involved in the transition, and really saying, how do we match where there might be investor funding, where there might be CSI funding, where there might be kind of more corporate funding for projects, and with those particular young people. But an important part of that is also ensuring that there is a capacity building aspect Because if you find, for example, an organization that maybe has existed for 2-3 years, exists in Mpumalanga, you cannot expect that it's going to have the capacity to run very complex transition operations, within a year or 2 years. You've got to make sure that you're bringing in a host of partnerships, a host of skills within government, within the private sector, and so on, and in civil society as well, that will then enable that capacity to be built within the organization, whether it's the governance processes, whether it's the process of financing and so on. So really, that's what we're doing. And I think a big part of it is informed by I think the feedback that we've gotten from young people in terms of them wanting to be involved in the transition. The transition for me, yes, is about a lot of the workers in the coal belt, who a lot of them are elder workers, but primarily it is about young people, because ultimately this is their future, right? This is the economy that they are inheriting, and they have to be, I think, in many instances, skilled, prepared, and backed in order to make sure that they're able to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming out of the transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kule. So we have the privilege of actually hosting this intergenerational dialogue at the 9th annual Green Youth Indaba. And the theme for this year's Indaba is nurturing entrepreneurship, cultivating skills, and attracting global green economy investments for job creation. And one of the things that Kule mentioned that is central to the just energy transition is economic transformation. So Udirile, I would like to bring you in on this point. As the NBI, your member organizations, where does big business stand, on economic transformation and the just transition? How does big business plan on bringing youth onto the table and ensuring that we take the necessary actions for this transition?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Intervising, for providing me the opportunity. Just also to take the opportunity as well to greet everybody in the room, especially my fellow peers and the youth that is in the room. And just to echo what Blessing said around the fact that old people don't listen. So we should really be at the forefront of the work that we're doing and stand up and take charge for the work that we're doing. But I think the support from our member companies, as some of you might know in the room, but just to re-emphasize, is that the MBI is a voluntary business movement with over 100 member companies, which are South African companies and multinational companies, right? So the work that we do also speaks to some of the ambitions as well, but also assisting in the transitions that we'd like to see within the country. So the support we received has been quite overwhelming from these member companies, in saying that how do we as the NBI become champions of assisting in the transition through our work that we do with the PCC, but also the work that we do within the TVET colleges. Private partnerships have enabled us to have a plan and chart a way forward of actually putting the TVET colleges at the center of the scale and perspective, because when you look at these marginalized communities, you'll find that most of them are in rural areas, they're in townships. And what you also find within those townships and the rural areas is TVET colleges. So it makes simple sense to put the TVET colleges at the center of this, ensuring that they provide the skills, but they also assist us with the skills mapping and the demand mapping, because the work that we do is highly governed by the demand-led approach through our ecosystem development, saying that there needs to be a demand in that particular area for that particular skill or that particular SMME, so that they can have sustained impact and sustainability in the long run. And the word that we always use is that we don't help our SMMEs or our beneficiaries, but we're actually on a journey of empowering them, right? And this empowerment is quite crucial, because the numbers tell us right now that 3.4 million of youths out of 10 million are not in employment or education and training, according to Stats SA. And green skills and the green economy encompasses a wide range of competencies, because I think normally in the past when we think about green economy, green energy, or circular economies, would normally link it to agriculture, water, and waste management. But although these skills are important and these adaptations are important, green economy and green transition is something that should be taken from all sectors, and ensuring that there's an adoption throughout all those sectors. So whether you find yourself in manufacturing, you find yourself in some of these not so common green sectors, that green skills or green development becomes sort of a mindset. I think once we can embed the mindset and say that this is the mindset that we'd like to have within our communities, then half of the job is done. And speaking of mindset as well, through the work that we're doing with the private sector, is that we've aimed by 2030 to set up 13 IRM hubs. So IRM mainly relating to installation, repair, and maintenance, which is individuals within the artisan space, but also have 50 skill centers within our communities by 2030 to foster this transition, facilitate this skills transfer and the skills upskilling as well. So that's the support that we've been getting from the private sector, quite overwhelming as well, but also trying not to fall into the trap of greenwashing, where corporates say that we've been doing stuff in terms of green economy, but it just happens to be a tick box exercise. So just being quite cognizant of that development of all of greenwashing, because it is the flavor of the month. It is the flavor right now. And I think in terms of becoming relevant to your consumers, some organizations are just throwing it around for the sake of greenwashing. But the work that we've been doing has received quite substantial support from the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Udirile. Some big words used there, abbreviation actually, IRM. I'll come back to that. But I just want to pose to Esther from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. I mean, you've heard what the young people of South Africa have to say from their different organizations. Do you think that these issues are unique to South Africa, or is this a SADC-wide, problem that we have?
So thank you so much. And firstly, I'd like to write on the protocols already laid, and would just like to greet my fellow youths joining this intergenerational dialogue. And jumping right to the question, to be honest, I was paying attention to what was being said, and I could relate 100% to all the issues that my fellow panelists have highlighted. To some extent, I was even thinking maybe they did some survey here or some project to look at what issues that Zambia is facing. But when you look at most of the issues that have already been outlined, this is something that the country is already facing. Harsh realities of climate change, like devastating droughts, which the country is currently experiencing, heavily affecting our agriculture and also our energy sector. Also looking at issues of youth participation when it comes to issues of climate policies and also the just transition agenda. I think currently in our country, there isn't enough room for youth to participate in these spaces because, I don't know, there's just never an enabling environment that allows you to participate in these spaces. So for me, it's not something that is so foreign. It's something that is across the SADC region, and it calls for a more, centric approach to our leaders to ensure that youths participate in this just transition agenda. Because when you look at the innovations and also the ideas that youths bring to the table when it comes to issues of policy design, policy implementation, and also monitoring of these policies that already existing, it plays a critical role. Because for me as a young person, I believe that we as youths play a critical role, or rather critical stakeholders in this just transition agenda. Hence, while these policies have been implemented or while these policies have been designed, there's need that we are given space on the tables to also have our inputs, because the decisions that are being made right now will affect our future generations, will also affect ourselves. So having a situation where policies are being designed and policies are being implemented without a youthful voice, it's something that is not really commendable. But I would like to commend the government of Zambia at the moment. We do have an approach where they ensure that there is a representation of youths at every table. So currently I sit on the National Cluster Advisory Group, which looks at sustainable environmental protection. So in the design of policies like the 8th National Development Plan or the recently launched National Green Growth Strategy, we do have a space where I do represent a youth movement that I currently run. And I do have my inputs as they design and implement these policies, but most of the challenges are not different. I think it runs across I don't want to say the region as a whole, but also Africa as a whole. Most of the challenges that have been presented is what we're also experiencing here. So it's not something too foreign. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Esther. You've heard it from Esther. These issues are not particularly unique to South Africa, but we do have some, issues that make us a little bit more vulnerable. And maybe Mbali, you can speak to us about, why South Africa is so vulnerable to, the climate crisis.
Yeah. So our landscape is quite diverse. And because of that, all of the climate impacts we feel. So we feel floods, droughts, heat waves, and other extreme weather events. So firstly, it's the landscape. Then secondly, and Kule was talking about this, just historically where we come from and the legacies that remain with us. You will always hear that South Africa is vulnerable to the triple threats, poverty, unemployment, and inequality. That's something that has existed with us for a long time and is entrenched in our being. On top of that, we remain the most unequal country in the world. That means that the gap between the rich and poor is unconscionably wide and continues to widen. So we are dealing with multiple threats at the same time, and a key characteristic of the climate crisis is that it exacerbates what already is there. So, we should take seriously that we are in threat.
Thank you so much, Mbali. Bertha, I want to bring us back to something that Udi really mentioned, and it's this IRM concept, this installation repair and maintenance initiative that they have running. And, part of the IRM involves basically, it identifies these occupations that, young people are said to be, going into or need to go into, such as plumbing, being an electrician or some sort of technician. Do you think these are the right skills that we should be focusing on in order for us to transition, or are we just looking in the wrong direction?
I'll just refer back to that intentionality about skills, right? And how relevant it is for people of different communities. I think what informs us when it comes to moving or transitioning in the skills sector is how we are building a table. Now, at the table, there's the government, there's the youth, right? There's affected communities, right? And different, sectors that are there. What is the youth saying at that table? Is plumbing something that's going to be sustainable for them in the future? Is it something that they're going to carry the backs of their communities on? These skills that are being proposed, are they going to bring economic viability to them? And so I think that also brings to, when the proposal of these skills is being discussed, we should also talk about the different finance models. Is there enough to actually finance this transition, you know? And is there enough to actually make sure that people are in sustainable careers? Because we cannot have ad hoc solutions. We cannot have those moments where we are now thinking about, for example, the nationally determined contributions that are being revised this year. And we are just ticking the boxes to say we have created a certain set of skills, you know. And so I think it's very important then to say, yes, we have come to the table as the youth. Yes, we are creating these tables of discussions, but what matters to us, what is relevant to us, are these industries going to take us out of these socioeconomic challenges that we are facing in our daily lives as people that bear the brunt of this climate crisis, as people that bear the brunt to the triple threats that you spoke of? Is it relevant to us? Is it taking us forward? Or are we going to be having this conversation again in the next few years? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertha. Kule, I would be remiss if I actually didn't ask you this question, and I know you know it's coming. Where is the money? And Bertha just, you know, she gave me that little nudge, and, you know, I have to ask, is there enough money to actually finance, you know, the transition? You spoke about the 8.5 billion, you know, where is that money? Where is it going? And what portion of it is actually going to disadvantage this youth that is here today in future? Because you mentioned that, you know, some of it is loans and some of it is in the form of grants. So will we find ourselves in a position in 30 years' time where we have to be paying back these loans that are meant for the transition?
I know, I think that's a really good question. And in fact, if anything, we talk about the 8.5 billion, but that's really the amount, and I think it's even a little bit more now, that comes from the IPG group, the International Partner Group. If you look at the plan that we have in terms of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, it actually calls for about 1.4 trillion rand. So you can then see that it's actually a lot more money that we require. In some sense, I think the money does exist. And then, of course, there are aspects where the money needs to be raised, right? Our biggest issue at the moment, if I'm quite honest with you, sitting in the JET IP, is not so much the money and the availability of the money, but rather is the pipeline of projects in which this money could be steered towards. That really is the big concern and where our big focus is. The money, of course, as we've talked about, comes from a diverse amount of sources, as we've spoken about. When the investment plan was put together, there was, of course, the money that was going to come from government itself, that government can drive in terms of the investments made in the energy transition. And I think government has put a lot of money, but there's also the money that the private sector has put, and the private sector has also unlocked billions of rand to ensure that they can be part of the just energy transition. But of course, I think the big focus of this conversation could be, how do you steer some of that existing money towards the people sitting in the room, which I think is really the important conversation. And this is why, as I talked about, we've really built the funding platform, because there's a recognition that this money might sit within CSI, it might sit in government, but really there has to be that work done in the center of government to make sure that we can unlock it, to make sure that it can get to the right beneficiary, right? And then I think as you've spoken about as well, and we as a country, quite frankly, while we may be bringing in much of the grant funding, and by the way, for the sake of transparency, because I think it's really important, especially as we speak about how we do it justly, especially as how we do it government, we've got a grants register on the president, we call it the stateofthenation.gov.za, which is really where the presidency reports on some of our critical actions. And that grants register really speaks to the money that's been allocated to us. What have we used it on? What has the grant funding actually been used for? So people can look there and they'll see that there's a host of activities that's happening. But as it relates to loans, luckily we actually live in a country with quite a sophisticated financial sector. And with very deep pockets of money, whether you're looking, at the work that's happening in the mining sector through the social labor plan, through kind of the financing mechanisms that exist through the, trusts, pensions, and etc. And a lot of that money, of course, because of ESG funding and the fact that it has to now start speaking to those ESG considerations, is being steered to the just transition one way or another. So we don't foresee a future where, for example, the future of South Africa is going to be burdened with a lot of money coming from abroad or debt funding. Of course, debt funding is important in the sense that it unlocks a lot of capital going forward. So we're not going to say that we're using any of that money, but I don't think it should be a big concern, for example. So as I've indicated, the big issue, of course, is making sure that we are leveraging these pools of money that actually exist within the country, that exists from the partnership that exists overseas, to make sure that we can actually get it to those young people. The one thing I would perhaps like to raise is, it's one thing having money, but it's another thing. Are you creating an environment for real entrepreneurship? Are you creating an environment for failure? Because that's part of an innovation system, for example. Of course, we don't have as much capital, and I would even argue as much low interest debt as countries in the EU, for example, Global North, or the US. But one thing that strikes me about these particular countries is, in the US, for example, you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed. It has very little to do with inflation, and very much a lot to do with billions of dollars that over the coming years are going to be invested in the energy transition and making sure that that country can catch up. One of the most interesting aspects is that there is, of course, a big ecosystem of entrepreneurs, along with young people that are operating in Silicon Valley, that I think the people in this room very espouse to be. And what you do find is that there is the room for failure. So you find that people have an idea, they are capacitated, they come from the best universities, but sometimes the money that they're able to get, whether from the private sector or the public sector, doesn't necessarily go to fruition, because one of the things we don't talk about the just energy transition is the room for innovation. And if there's going to be innovation, you also have to create the room for failure. And what we tend to find in our system, and it's maybe a legacy of our past, is that we do allocate resources to young people. We do allocate resources to new inventions, to innovation. However, when things don't work out, for example, we're pretty harsh and we write those people off. When in fact, the nature of innovation is that there will be failure. The nature of innovation is that people will learn from their failure and they'll move on. So for me, the question is not so much if the money is there, it's how that money is used. It's whether it allows for that space of innovation to grow. Whether it allows for that failing forward to happen. And if the people who are at the center of that are young people, and we've seen that in places where these innovation spaces have been created, whether it's in the US, other parts of the world, parts of the developing South, that if you create the space, if you create the funding mechanisms, the capacitization of those people, that ultimately young people will be the ones who drive the transition, especially from an entrepreneurial and technological perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Kule. We need to leave some room for innovation. Udirila mentioned that the 3.5 million unemployed young people in South Africa. And one of the issues with the transition is this fear of, the loss of jobs. And when we have, things like IRM occupations being presented to us as, the preferred occupations, it leaves a lot to be desired. And it leaves you questioning whether we can really leave that room for innovation. So, Udirile, we are at, the Green Youth Indaba, and we're talking to young and emerging entrepreneurs. Is there any room, for innovation? Can we, look for opportunities, outside of IRM?
Most definitely. I think there is innovation, big room for innovation in the work that we do. Or particular impotence on or particular placement on IRM opportunities that we've identified gaps in terms of providing the skills and providing technical support, providing workers in this space, because you'll find that there's construction projects, there's commercial property, there's public facilities, industrial nodes, but there's also the households that could benefit from some of these occupational skills that we have. The demand will always be there. There's always going to be a pipe that bursts, but through the work that we do as well, there is room for innovation, saying that when you come through as a plumber, when you come through as an electrician, how do we then provide you with the upskilling to get a solar PV green card so that you can transition into some of these some of these sectors, some of these green sectors. So the construction, how do we get the SMMEs to be in line with the Green Building Council of South Africa and the work that they're doing and the stuff that they're building. And innovation is there. And if we can actually untap the minds of the youth and say that innovation should exist everywhere, saying that not necessarily in agriculture, not necessarily in energy, but if we can have a green mindset to everything that we do, then we're halfway there. Because another key thing is that there's an importance of lifelong learning. When you think of the word green, it's something that's constantly fresh, innovative, and is up to date, So as the youth as well, we will need to constantly reapply ourselves, constantly innovate over the next 30 or so years, because the definitions of what the green economy is currently today aren't the same definitions that we've had probably 25 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So there is definitely room for innovation. So whatever study field that you find yourself in, so the green economy is not just something that sits within those specific sectors. From the Green Economy Summit in 2009, there was an identified list of 9 uses of the green economy, stretching from transport, stretching from waste management, stretching from resource use, but also putting into aspects the digital skills that are needed to that, because most of the time you'll find that if something is transitioning to green, there's a digital element that sort of decreases the carbon footprint towards that. So getting the youth to think in those lines is quite critical, saying that there is room for innovation and embedding that mindset that green economy is not necessarily agriculture, energy, water, or waste, but it can be done through everything that we do. And not only for the IRM individuals as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Udirile. Esther, decreasing our carbon footprint. It is the year of revising nationally determined contributions, and ahead of the 29th UNFCCC Congress of Parties. What are some key messages, going into, COP29 that we as young people should be going into COP with, messages about, fostering a future-ready youth for a just transition and, not just about decreasing our carbon footprint?
Okay, so as we head to COP29, I think I'd like to urge, firstly, our world leaders to support and also empower just youth-led climate initiatives and ensure that there's inclusive representation of these youths in these global spaces when it comes to governance matters, because we do understand that the youth voice matters, and of course our actions count. And for us, our youths, of course, I would like to urge our youths to go to COP29 with a message that even as much as we preach finance for climate change, finance for mitigation and adaptation, how are we then ensuring that our youths are skilled, our youths are filled with knowledge around the just transition process? Like you had mentioned at the beginning of the dialogue, most people don't really understand what just transition means. So we can have the funding, but if we don't have a space where youths really understand the concept of just transition, the concept of basic climate action, then work done is equal to zero. So to the world leaders there, I would like to urge them again to prioritize this youth participation in this just transitioning process, even as we go to COP29 and beyond COP29, because youth participation in these climate policies or also climate processes is very cardinal as we transition from the current economy to the green economy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll now open the floor for some questions. If there are any questions in the room, please do raise your hand. I see we have, some questions in the Q&A section, but I would like to actually give the colleagues online an opportunity to, speak. So I see a question from Sedzani, another one from William, and one from Kopano. If you don't mind, please just raise your hand so that we can give you an opportunity to speak. Yes. So we have 2 hands in the room. And I see 1 hand from Muisile online. We'll start with the hands in the room.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Lebohang Duli from Advocates for Climate Justice South Africa. Mine is not really a question. I'm not sure if it's okay if I comment. Firstly, I would like to welcome the discussions. I think they were very informative, and there's a lot that I have learned in this session, particularly on the issue of just transition, because I had a lot of questions in terms of that, but clarity was provided. I mean, there was a point that was raised that young people are not really, active in the space. And I think one of the challenges and one of the leading causes to why young people are not really active in the space, especially young people at the grassroots level, I mean, in our rural areas, in our townships, is because the space is not inclusive. We are not going back into the trenches and making people and educating people about climate change. That is why even when we are experiencing the impacts of climate change, there are so many conspiracy theories that come out of it because people do not understand what is climate change. And I think we need to change our approach in terms of how we are addressing the issues of climate change. And also, what I've also picked up is that in terms of when we educate, particularly young people, is that we focus mainly on profit maximization, whereby, yes, we are trying to address the issues of unemployment and so forth, but what about the social impacts of climate change? And we are not tapping into the space, and that is why it is so difficult for us to be able to action the policies that we come up with, because we are not focusing on the social aspects of climate change. So we also need to change that approach. Yes, we need entrepreneurs, we need to tackle the issues of unemployment, but what about the real issues, the social issues when it comes to climate change? I mean, the reality is that the reason why we are here today is because the system itself, the system that, like capitalism, is the reason why we are here today. It focuses on the issues of profit maximization through exploitation, not just us as human beings, but also nature. So if we focus mainly on the issue of how we can make profit out of it, how are we going to be able to tackle the real issue? How are we going to do away with the system? And also with the issue of skills. I mean, my biggest challenge in terms of the skills is that our approach in South Africa in terms of how we identify skills, we focus mainly on the issue of certification. Now, we focus mainly on the issue of certification, and we are missing the point. And I always say this, that it's not true that we have a skills deficit, but it's mainly because of how we have classified skills. Now, if we change our approach in terms of how we view skills, we realize there are so many skilled people. I always make an example. There are so many people who are mechanics, and some people that have cars, most people that have cars, actually trust people in the townships to fix their cars rather than them going to the actual garages and fixing their cars, then why is it that then when we identify skills, we do not identify those skills? And it's going to be a challenge when now we have to bring in the issue of scaling, of green scaling, when we have not really fixed the issues of how do we then identify skills. Thank you.
Greetings again. My name is Kosnatis Bia. I'm from Advocates for Climate Justice South Africa as well. Next to me is my chairperson just finishing talking, but I'll allow it. We took a decision that we'll want to have a women-driven approach towards the issue of climate justice. The reason being is that if you have women in the forefront, you are actually having young people in the center. And most of our policies and the things that we discuss in this country, the reason that they are not going forward is because older people, whom likely are men, sit in that corner, discuss and decide upon with the interest of profit or money at the end of the day. But I want to take you aback. We have discussed this thing in South Africa. We went for fourth industrial revolution. The fact that we were discussing there, we were not concerned about what are the challenges and what are the problems that we are responding to. All what we're interested in, how are we going to benefit as the business sector. We're not so much invested into what other people are going to be benefiting out of the transition from the third to the fourth industrial revolution. Now, we are in another theme as well of climate action. No one talks about the justice that needs to be involved in the process of transition. No one talks about anything. Each and every person that is coming into the space is likely. The reason some of us are not here, this is not a true reflection of the delegation that you found in that side. But you will go into the room that has most young people. It's the room that speaks about money. It tells the concern that we have about young people and leaders in this country. We are not so concerned about providing solutions that will respond into the daily challenges of our lives, but we are only concerned about profit maximization at that current point and at that current juncture without understanding the true problems that are existing in the society. Because in order for us to respond effectively to someone who's at Wanongoma, to someone who's at Kwak, it's for us to have a better understanding of their challenges. Let us go down to the grassroots. Let us engage those people. The reason being in the environmental space, you do not find the policy not being implemented in the manner that will respond to the challenges. It's because the policy does not speak to the realities of the ground. And the reason it does not speak to the realities, it's only about the people who have researched about the challenge, not the people who have lived the experiences of that challenge. Me coming to advise you based on the policy because I'm now affected by that thing on a daily basis, it's going to respond directly to these challenges that I'm facing. But if it's someone who does not even know where is Guamash, who does not know how is Verulam look like, that particular person will want to respond, but the challenge that he is responding to is only on the literature that he has reviewed, not on the lived experiences. In our approach in dealing with this, I propose, and part and parcel of the things that I think the Presidential Climate Commission will have to take into consideration, is that we need to bring these civil organizations, we need to bring these NPOs, NGOs that you were mentioning. Let's go to these young people, let's go to these women. What are the challenges? Because us saying let's transit without resolving into the problems of the past will eventually say we are causing more problems because whatever that we are having in this state, the climate action challenge came about when we were trying to resolve the issue of energy crisis and whatnot. We expanded our scope, we did everything that we could do at the country at the time without having it in mind that in the near future, climate change is now seen as a byproduct of our own struggles, trying to respond to them, and now we have created another problem. If we do not take into consideration even the other challenges, we are likely to create more problems out of trying to respond to climate change. The speaker on that side said, we need to be mindful of the consequences because there's nothing that comes as holy glory. We need to know as well what are the challenges that will result with us transitioning to the better place, because we will have to weigh the probability on which one is good and which one is bad. And if we transit, is this the correct time for us to transit to South Africa, or are we playing the chasing game that those in the front are taking us forward? But if we do that, are we doing it with an intention of whose class interest are we going to be saving at the end? Are the people of South Africa, or we're going to make the investors happy? Because that's what, there's one line that was said there, that all our policies and proposal and concepts we write them through the eye of an investor. We do not write them through the eye of a person who faces the challenges. Let us go down to the ground. Let's bring the bottom-up approach. And I think it's the only way we'll come out to resolve to these problems. But if we want to take decisions at the top and then we disseminate them to the ground, it's not going to be possible. And lastly, as I said, Dan, I think let us invest more in capacitating even young people that are given platform into leading the people to the front. But if we fail to do so, I don't think capacity building will become a reality in the space. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I am Kerisha. I am from Umgeni Water. Umgeni Utugela Water. I don't want them to come for me. I don't know what this question or comment, but what I've noticed is, okay, one, as the first speaker said, that the whole thing with climate change, when you're speaking to people, even, for example, in the workplace, these are people that you consider young, educated, but when you speak of climate change, yes, the fact that you can feel it, it still does not matter to them. It's still a hoax. So then how do we actually start with educating? Because it's not the case of just going even to a place like I come from Tongaat where the tornado hit. You can go there and tell them that this is because of the weather that's changing because of the climate. But for them, it's okay, we are unemployed. We have drug issues. We do not care about your climate. When we had the water crisis, nobody cared about saving water when it came back. So they had to go into low water shedding because it just became a problem. So how do we actually address that? And then when you speak about skills, I think a lot of us coming from the history that we come from, the majority of the country and the youth always push towards formal qualifications, your degrees, your diplomas, which is obviously there's nothing wrong with it. But I think a few years back, Mr. Blade Zamanda said that, no offense to anybody, but he's like, why do we have so many hundreds of people doing BAs when there's a skills shortage? And as you mentioned, the skills shortage, you actually need to look at it, but how do we get people away from thinking that a degree is what we need? Because I'd say that because of the history that we've come from, it's like, I need to be the first person in my family that gets a degree. I need to be the first person in my community that gets a degree. I need to be a BSc engineer. I need to be a BTech engineer. I need to be a doctor. I need to be a lawyer. No, I don't care about that climate, you know? And the thing is, it is directly affecting us. But now for us, if we look at our daily decisions, it's like, I want to fly from country to country. I do not care what my carbon footprint is. So how do we get people actually thinking and moving away from that to say that, okay, if your skills may not have, you may not come from that university, but the thing is the skill that's needed in the country, you're still going to be able to make money. You're still going to be able to contribute. And the fact that contributing to this cause is much more important in the long run than me just having a degree that's hanging on the wall. And honestly, coming from an engineering background, most of the engineers are not in the engineering sector. They're in a whole lot of other sectors, making money in the banks and stuff. So that's actually skills going to waste, because now you've got people also that are skilled, but because there's no job opportunities, they go into completely different sectors where obviously money is the driving force. So yeah, just my question, how do we actually address it and actually, I don't know, get into that point where we can, you know, like penetrate the people's minds to actually be like, think like, okay, I'm that one person, but I can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll actually take the two hands online, because the first two that we had were more comments than questions, before we tackle Sarisha's question. William, one of our youth and Just Transition ambassadors. William, I see your hand is up. You can go.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is William Sohavela. I wanted to touch on the issue of innovation. EV production is a very water-intensive process. So the solutions that are being proposed are not perfect. So we really do need innovation on our side, on the African side. So I would really love to see more entrepreneurs involved in this sort of discussions, so that they can innovate, being guided by the policy, so that they innovate with minds, keeping in mind that they have to produce solutions that are good for our environment, and that we improve on those solutions that we get from the Western countries. And I think we are more harsh on our innovators and entrepreneurs because of the culture that we have. Usually we follow Western solutions, we take them and we use them, we don't develop our own. I think we need to be a step ahead. We need to work hard and to innovate more. Um, I've seen a lot of opportunities in terms of innovation in the country, and I really wish that we could take them and move forward. And I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. Sibuso, you're next.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Sibuso from the Youth Policy Committee, speaking to you guys from Mpumalanga. So I have a few questions. So I think Odirile, my question would be, how do we actually bridge the gap between the youth and adults? Because from where I'm from, here in Mpumalanga, I have less than 10% of youth actually applying to go to, like 10% of matrix actually applying to go to TVET colleges or to higher educational institutes. So how do we actually involve also that youth that believes they can get jobs with their matrix and etc.? And my second question would be, also with these proposed skills, so some of us, we don't have running water at home. So some, like, how are we considering the environments, or are we considering where we all, like our backgrounds or we live currently, to say which are we gonna ascertain there? Because people can, this side, people usually live through mechanics, building, you know, plastering and stuff like that. But when it comes to plumbing, it brings sense for me to leave my home where there's no running water and go away Pitori, where I'll, you know, fix a house that side, and come back where I actually don't have running water. And my last question would be, how do we actually get assistance so that we can raise our own community? Because, and it's okay that you guys are, most of these campaigns go to Emalahleni, but there is a whole lot of part of us that are also this side, and we need to take action for ourselves so that people actually understand the climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sibuso. Udirile, if you're still online with us, how do we get young people involved? You know, some of the skills that we identified that are needed, or at least the certification, as some of the colleagues in the room, are not really, you know, something that applies to everybody. How do we get young people involved? How do we get the young people, so those who are still, you know, in school, at matric level, how do we get them informed about the skills that are needed?
Thank you so much. I think first things first, platforms such as this one, like the Green Youth Endeavor that's taking place right now, are critical platforms for young people to engage, but also ensuring that it goes to the local communities. So then how do we then move forward in saying that some of the discussions that landed up here, how do they end up as snippets in community radio stations, so that the young people could have this information and sort of work in line with their behaviors, their perceptions, and their mindsets? Because I think if we don't work towards adjusting or adapting those three things, then we sort of missing the mark. But also from a mindset perspective, letting the youth know that a plumber's hourly rate is actually much more than a doctor's hourly rate, right? And creating some of those storytellings and saying that there is money in this particular industries, but the key driver in how you make money will be innovation. Driving innovation challenges in school, and ensuring that this becomes embedded from a mindset perspective, because once you influence mindset, you can change the perceptions and you can obviously change the behavior. I think one thing that I always used to say is that you're always right and you're always wrong. From the moment where you think that that you know everything, then you're wrong, but you're always right, because whatever you're facing is a true reflection of the community that you come from within. So I think young people need to be the change makers within their community, pick up their hands and mobilize as well. So so the gentleman who just posed the question saying that he's in Mpumalanga, he's also responsible in advocating and getting other young people involved and actually challenging the other young people within around him. I think if we can start within our local communities, or start with our 5 friends or 10 people that we know, and actually start advocating towards this, then we would have actually created that appetite and saying that this is what the future looks like. Career guidance specialists at school also need to also be informed and actually take cognizance of the fact that we're going through a just transition. And when these schools are having career fairs, actually illustrate the opportunities and the trends that exist within these fields, because the South African population, the South African youth is very innovative. I think we saw that during COVID and other parts of struggle, where we came up with very innovative solutions. And I think right now is that time again for us to stand up again and be at the forefront of these innovations, but also form a sense of community and advocacy around each other as young people. Then I think we would have actually hit the mark.
Thank you, thank you. Nkosinathi mentioned that we should be co-creating solutions with marginalized and vulnerable groups. Mbali, in your experience, I mean, with this drive, getting people to know about the Constitution, now in this space that you're now operating in, you know, how do we start educating people about climate change? You know, do we use the same approach that we use to the Constitution, or do we use a different approach? I remember when we were growing up, we had, you know, a big HIV campaign.
Exactly what I was about to speak about.
Still my friend. And we don't really see campaigns like that around climate change. So do it now.
I'm so glad you asked, which I think touches to a point you made about how do we make people care. And you know, with HIV and AIDS epidemic in the 90s and 2000s, we were the highest country with infections. And there was a lot of denialism, there was a lot of misinformation, hoax, all of those things, similar to today. So a group of people from the AIDS Law Project decided we're going to do what's hard, right? Firstly, we're going to start by educating people in communities. How are we going to do that? We're going to take one person from Tembisa, one person from Soweto, one person from Durban, and we're going to train them on science and how to break it down to the ordinary person. And once you do that, it's easy then to link to the everyday. The people who were trained through this training, the trainers program, went back to their communities and were able to link that if you don't practice safe sex, you will get sick. And if you do get sick, the only way to stay alive is to have access to ARVs, to eat well, to exercise, have a balanced life. So they were able to draw the links between science and lived realities. That's something that's important, but it's hard to do because it takes time. So they did that over a number of years. And once the population was educated enough about the practicalities of how disease spreads and a person's responsibility in that, they were able to mobilize and organize. Not only did, this is now the treatment action campaign, not only did they organize just amongst themselves, they looked for solidarity with other organizations. Maybe not in health, but in education. If not in education, then in engineering. Because they were able to convince people, rightly so, that the HIV/AIDS epidemic is a human problem that affects everybody. What affects me affects you. And then they took a third step once people were organized, is that they went to court, they litigated. Because at the time, pharmaceuticals had ridiculous prices for accessing ARVs, and the government couldn't afford it. But also our government didn't want to create clinics in different places of the country so people can have access to it. So they went to court and they won the case. But in fact, they didn't win the case because the judge said so. It was because they were on the streets. They were on the streets demanding what is important to them. So it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel, right? What I think is important is maybe a change of perspective. We did the same thing around educating people about the Constitution, and we can do the same thing around the climate crisis. So let's change our perspective, and it becomes not something that seems impossible. It's just difficult, and we can get it done.
Thank you so much. Our panelists are still here. You can engage with them, or alternatively, you can contact either the PCC or CAAP if you would like, the details. I see, Dora, we're really out of time.
We are.
But we're out of time. But I'll give you this one last shot. Thank you.
All right, so I think what Mbali spoke to was very important. And the thing about climate change is that when we go back to our communities and we speak about it, let it not be high-level technical languages, right? I think we also have to work on, if you know language, how do we turn the term climate change or just transition or nationally determined contributions into languages that ugogo would understand, languages that a 5-year-old would understand, right? And then when we do that, people even become more involved in policy spaces because they are able to say, why did you not include this in the climate change gender action plan? That's not just a term for them. Now they understand that this is about my livelihood. And when we do speak to people, we have to understand that climate change is not just a silo topic. It is connected and it has intersectionality. So when you speak to people in Mpumalanga, you're going to be speaking to them about health, right? And the fact that a hospital is probably 20 kilometers away from where they stay, right? That is also intersection. So whatever that fossil fuel plant is emitting to them, they do not have the access to quickly go to the hospital. How do they make it a topic that cuts across other topics? When you speak about floods, this is your bread and butter. When you speak about drought, this is your bread and butter. So we have to really, when we go to our communities, use languages that people understand. And I think we do have a big task on our hand to start actually using the institutions to say, we need to translate, for example, the state of action, climate action, the state of climate action, right? Now we have a task to say, how do we present this in a language that people will understand? So it's accessible, so that I can say, no, actually, Commissioner, I don't think that's relevant to my lived experience, So that is where I'll park it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bertha. Now that we've established that, all the panelists are actually young people, and we are out of time. In one sentence, what does a just transition mean to you? We'll start off with Kule online.
I'll just I'll just use my time maybe to add what Bertha said, because it's absolutely critical what she has said. There's a story once told when I was still in the student movement, which was effectively an old trade unionist during the apartheid era would stand outside of a factory and he would shout, "Workers for a proletariat revolution." And every day the workers would pass him, and until one was kind enough to say, no one understands what you're saying. And I think it speaks to what's just being said, right? Which is effectively when that trade unionist then actually started speaking about wages and started speaking about the things that people dealt with, the bus price, that people dealt with on a daily basis, that, you know, the larger issue of, you know, of workers' rights, and so it became quite relevant. So I think it's quite important. The language you use is critical. So I'd really like to support that last thing. And then there was a question around how do we make sure that young people want to make sure that they enter these industries? And the reality of the situation is people can only deal with what is in front of them. You know, I worked for the longest time in the mining industry. And if you go to any town that has a mining legacy, people will talk about the fact, even if they go and study at UCT and they're from Limpopo, they'll want to work in the mining industry, right? And the fact is that that's what they know. Their brothers work there, their fathers work there, their mothers in some aspects used to work there as well. And the only way we can change the fact that people want to go into those industries is by making sure that we actually have pilots, examples, and we build alternatives where the first generation in someone's family can work in a renewable energy plant, can work in a sustainable agricultural co-op, and so on. And so that creates the opportunity that that person knows that this is an alternative. That's the only way that we're going to push things forward. And so there's an impetus on all of us to really work together, whether it's government, the private sector, civil society, especially, to make sure that we can build these alternative realities, that we can build these projects, which are not perfect, are not going to resolve everything through a silver bullet, but will get us closer, I think, to building the economy of the future, which we're looking for. So that's my last piece. Thank you, Jay.
In one sentence, what does a just transition mean to you?
I thought I had covered it in my summary, but I think
One sentence. Don't be unruly. One sentence.
As I indicated at the beginning, for me, it is about holistic societal transformation.
Udirile?
Thanks. Thank you so much. I think what a transition looks like for me is fostering innovation and fostering youth empowerment and involvement. That's the only way we can achieve just a transition. You mentioned that 30 years later, we could be sitting in that building and talking about this, but the reality is 30 years later, that building might not be there because of the adverse climate change effects that we face. So yeah, thanks.
Esther? You are muted.
Sorry. For me, a just transition is just one that's not morally imperative, but one that also factors in the social and economic aspects and also ensures that there's fair and inclusive participation, especially from the youth side. Yeah.
Bertha?
A just transition to me is transparency, it is accountability, and it is also trusting that people understand their own challenges and they can come to the table with youth-led, community-led solutions. Thank you.
Mbali?
Down with capitalism.
And if they thought the youth of 76 was unruly, the youth of 2024 that answers a one-sentence question with a paragraph. We'll show them flames. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Mudiehi. Please engage with us on our socials. We are Presidential Climate Commission on all the social media networks. We are Climate ZA on Twitter. Information email address is info@climatecommission.org.za. Get in contact. Send us your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ntaviseng, and thank you to our panelists for such a nuanced and engaging discussion. It was very much in depth. We touched on topics that we never previously got to in our intergenerational dialogues in the past. And for that, really all we can say is thank you as a CAAP project. There was a question about how can we get more engaged, right? So how can youth engage more? The Climate Ambition to Accountability Project hosts an annual Youth Climate Champions Bootcamp. And our bootcamp is upcoming. This year, we'll be hosting it from the 2nd to the 6th of September. Our location is not in Gauteng, but I can't tell you where it is, but we've got a lot of complaints about how everything is in Gauteng. So I think you'd be happy to know we're out of the province this year. So we are looking at an age group between the age of 18 and 34. Applications will open on the 21st of June and they will close on the 31st of July or up until we get 1,000 applications. So as soon as you see that our applications are open, please sign up for the bootcamp. And don't just take my word for it. I'd like to ask my colleague Yasir to show you a brief video of how our bootcamp went down last year. Yasir, over to you.
Thanks, Madiha. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Are we good?
All good. Thank you.
My name is Charmaine Morale. We are here on our second annual Youth Climate Champion program, where we have 20 participants from all over South Africa. We are all gathered here to discuss climate change, climate action, and climate policies.
Climate action means equity and justice. What we do and why we do what we do is to make sure that it's for the benefit of all. This bootcamp really has helped me understand a more diverse approach on how to start really simplified conversations around climate change.
And I believe that from here, we're going to go back to our respective communities to actually bring about change as we have learned here.
In my area, we are experiencing high temperatures and less rainfall.
I want my policymakers to listen. That's what I want. I want them to listen, and I'll emphasize that word.
But being here, being amongst people of various professions, people from various backgrounds, it has provided me a better comprehension of how multifaceted the problem is.
So climate action to me means the implementation of what we discuss in these big rooms.
I would like to encourage everyone to apply. It's also an opportunity to start building your network as a young youth climate activist.
From my team, the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project, we would like to thank each and every one of you for being part of this journey. And most importantly, we would love to thank our 20 participants from all over South Africa for being part of this journey with us too.
Thank you for sharing that video, Yasir. In closing, I would like to thank our partners on this project, the Presidential Climate Commission, for all your efforts towards ensuring that this event is a success. I would like to thank our distinguished participants online and in person for making this discussion so robust and giving it so much depth. We really have quite a bit to write about. Hope that you keep up with us on social media. So the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project has 3 project partners, and you'll be seeing our blog posts on this event and the likes on our socials. That would be the South African Climate Action Network, the WWF South Africa, and the Institute for Economic Justice. And last but not least, of course, I would like to thank the Youth Climate Champion Secretariat of the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project. Thank you so much to our project manager, Innocentia Mudau, for all of her efforts and her support. Thank you to our 2 interns who are here with us today. As we take youth development quite seriously as a project, I'd like to note that their efforts are very much as equal project members on the team. So it's not tokenism at all. Thank you. And of course, thank you to our funders for making this event happen. I'd like to thank everybody for your time. This recording will be up on the SACAN YouTube. And if you'd like to engage further, you can of course find us on social media. You can engage with us in person after this meeting. Thank you.